So, Bob, I sent out a recent survey asking everyone to rate all the co-hosts, and you were rated extremely highly. Everyone loves you as a co-host.
Well, they don't have to live with me, so that helps.
So I thought we would make it more of a regular thing, every other week or something.
Oh.
And
first time hearing about it.
Yeah. So I thought that we would answer some patron questions, maybe go over some news stories in psychology that are related to clinical stuff, since you're my clinical co-host.
Yeah,
that is beloved so much by the listeners. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Bob?
I am your old friend from graduate school, also a therapist here in town, Seattle.
And if you want to hire Bob as your therapist, he has 1 or 2 openings, bobgoettle.com. All right, this first question. I am an attorney at a law firm, and a few of the partners' behaviors are downright absurd. For example, one partner will throw draft papers across the table if he doesn't like something written. One will make belittling comments while saying he is so much better than everyone else. One mocks people's attire or appearance. One has thrown draft papers at an associate and screamed at her. And one has harassed several associates and assistants to the point where many have quit. Also, involving HR does not help. From my office, I can see the partners as they walk back to their offices. The look on their face seems as though they enjoy making people uncomfortable and upset. 2 weeks ago, I had my annual review. I received a good review and was told I would be working more with one of the partners who was very difficult. I was told, quote, "Everyone likes to work with you because you're very friendly and nice, and this partner would like to work more with me. I don't know what to do, and I have been worrying a lot. I am a sensitive person, and many times I am overly polite. Working with this partner wears on me, but I try not to let it show. As an associate, I cannot refuse to work with this partner because it impacts my career at the firm." Questions. How do you work? So there's a number of questions here, so let's just go over these. And I'll just ask you, Bob. How do you work with bosses who have narcissistic traits, sociopathic traits, or are just generally difficult people? What do you say, Bob?
I say that's really damn hard.
Yeah.
Really hard. And let's be clear, there's probably no way to do that and feel comfortable at the same time. You could be very effective and work with somebody, and it can take a toll on you, and it probably will.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The question sort of implies there's a technique or some kind of responsibility on her part to figure out a way to cope. But what you're saying is like, there might not be a way to cope. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet she is really good at her job, and I'm sure she is sought out because she's temperate or moderate or whatever. And that's a hard place for her to sit. Somebody who's going to be abusive.
Yeah.
Yuck.
Yeah, I guess if there's one thing, because she says she's very accommodating, very,
right.
Nice. I guess one thing you could do is go on a campaign to be less nice and therefore less attractive to work with, and therefore, not like totally, a dick to everyone.
Sure.
But a little less accommodating to their problematic behavior.
Put a little salt in the sugar.
Yeah, less enabling, Like, I think of an example like, you're working with the partner, and the partner is like, berates you, makes fun of you or something, like says something like, "Oh, well, that's an interesting work outfit today." And a nice person, an overly nice person might say like, "Oh yeah, sorry. The laundry is full and I just threw this together. Sorry about it." And that kind of, if that's a pattern, that sort of enables that behavior that you don't like to see.
Right.
A less enabling but not completely confrontational approach would just be like, thanks for sharing,
Yeah.
or, "Oh, so you don't like it. Oh, okay. Or just something neutral, just, or even just ignore the comment. Just be like, okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's get back to, what we're talking. So, or even something in between, like, oh, ha ha ha. So anyway, like there's a way of reacting that's like not super accommodating to that behavior. And maybe that'll curb it a little bit, but maybe also it'll make you less attractive to work with by those groups of people.
A thought that occurs to me as you're talking is catch them being good. Like ignore the shit behavior, and anytime they're polite or kind or the least bit, something that you like or want, say thank you. Or, boy, thanks for being, blah, 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 blah.
I like
catch them being good. It's probably not going to turn someone who's got those kinds of habits, and it sounds like there's a whole culture here where all these partners are, like feeding off one another or whatever. Probably not going to change it, like turn it around, but might make it easier.
Yeah. And really, a lot of people, that's what they're looking for anyway, is some kind of positive recognition.
Right.
Positive recognition. And I mean, you're saying your advice is good, and then you're sort of downplaying it. But honestly, I think that's a great idea. We tend to look at mean people or partners or people in power, Donald Trump, for example, as people who are sort of above the need for accolades or positive feedback. And it's completely not true. If anything, they're more sensitive and more needy of that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. When I was program director for a few years, I realized that. I was like, because the whole time, for 20 years, I was watching my boss be a boss, and he just seemed so confident. He just seemed so above it all. I felt so unconfident. I felt so needy of his positive feedback. Once I got to program director, I realized how the insecurity actually increases because there's so much more at stake. When you're, just take McDonald's, for example, when you are a cashier, there's not a lot at stake. Like you have to take the order, you have to be a little polite. There's certain set of tasks. But when you're manager of the McDonald's, you have to get every employee to like you, because that's an important thing as a manager. Your employees are supposed to like you. They need to work. You got to get them to work hard. You have to have all the products be good. You have to have all the customers be happy. You have to have your neighboring businesses have to be happy. The owner has to be happy, or several owners have to make money. Like there's the amount of responsibilities and the amount of people who have reason to criticize you or praise you exponentially increases. And by that complication, it means that you cannot please everybody. If you want to make the customers extra happy, you have to push the employees harder. You know what I mean? If you want your suppliers to be happy, that means your employees might actually be less happy because they don't have the things that they need. Like there's no way to make everyone happy when you're in charge. And so these partners, for example, they might actually be doing this partially because they're incredibly insecure and incredibly stressed out, and a little bit of positive praise for good behavior might actually go a long way with them. Another question. You mentioned in one of your podcasts about having an abusive supervisor at one time. How did you handle that experience? Have you ever had an abusive supervisor, Bob?
Abusive, no, but punitive, yes.
Okay. How did you deal with it? How did you handle it?
Not well.
Yeah, what do you mean?
My self-respect took a hit because I ended up being too passive and not actually respecting my own values, needs.
Was this back in the late 90s?
In the late 90s? No, it was in the 2000s.
Oh.
Who was in the 90s?
Well, when you were at CPC, wasn't there some weird...
Oh, God. Yeah, that sucked. I wouldn't say she was abusive, but she had a grudge against me, and it was interesting. From one year, she wrote me this review. I had my performance review, and she wrote this really long awful review about what a jerk I was. And then over that year, I got a new supervisor, and his review was much shorter, much more positive. And I'm like, wow, what a difference, you know. But you know, that's interesting because she would not say probably of herself that she had a grudge, or she would probably say she was evaluating the behavior that she saw. But these things are interactive. They're not a one-way street. You know what I'm saying?
Do you care to share what happened, or like what did she criticize you for?
Oh, I wouldn't remember the details.
Oh,
yeah, that was a long time ago. It's 20 years now. No, I actually don't know. I think the reason, though, she had a grudge against me was because she set me up on a blind date with her good friend, and I wasn't interested beyond the blind date. And so never followed up, and I think that put a bad taste in her mouth about me, and then we had to work together. And then she became my boss.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that was before she was my boss. That was when I was an intern.
Yeah, I mean, you must have told me about that back then. I remember. I mean, that's why it popped into my head, was because I remember, you know, you having troubles with her. So then she just kind of lost perspective and decided to. She took it personally, or something.
I think so. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did you lose sleep over it? Were you stressed out? Was it hard to deal with?
Yeah, because, you know, weekly supervision meetings, and you're supposed to talk clinical cases, and, you know, that's a lot of personal stuff comes up in that. And so I'm having to be vulnerable with somebody who doesn't like me.
Did you regret going on a blind date with a coworker's friend?
No, I'd do that again.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, not now because I'm married, but
yeah.
No, that'd be all right. She was just a staff person. And then when I got a job there, she got promoted.
Yeah.
And then became my boss. So that was just, you know, bad luck.
Yeah. Yeah. So the only thing I'll add to what Bob is saying is just reiterating what Bob is saying is that, it's awful. I officially hate like 4 or 5 people on this planet. And, you know, I think 3 of them are coworkers, ex-coworkers of mine. So it's really awful. And this is, you know, of course, out of probably tens of thousands of people I've come into contact with in my life.
Right.
And I legitimately have PTSD from some of these people, you know, where when I see them, my heart starts to race.
Yeah.
My body feels threatened by these individuals because of their personality disorder and the way that they abused me.
Yeah.
And I assume a lot of other people around them. You know?
Probably, yeah.
And yeah, how did I handle it? And as Bob said, not good. I talked to my therapist, I suppose, which helped, honestly. I talked to all my friends and family about it as often as I could, which was frequently. They listened. That helped. I lost sleep over it. I would, you know, you take a shower and your mind starts to wander, and your mind goes to those people and the ongoing conflicts, and you know, you sort of break out in a cold sweat, and you know, it's awful. You ask how do you not allow the behavior to affect you? So the thing that I did over time, because you can't really avoid them because you're stuck with them, right? I mean, the easiest answer is to find another job, but that's easier said than done. And plus, it doesn't guarantee that there's going to be less sociopaths at your next job. The thing that I did was I basically treated them like they were clients or customers at all times. So with most people, I'm trusting, you know, like I'll engage with them given the situation at a trusting level. I just trust that, like when I'm interacting with you right now, Bob, I don't have a guard up with you. I'm not like, you know, watch what you say, or don't get too close, or don't reveal too much, because, you know, Bob's going to jump on that, because you don't. And most people don't. But abusive people, once you've seen their true colors, then you say, oh, that person, for whatever reason, is not to be trusted. And so in my mind, I keep them at arm's length. So, and whenever I enter into a conversation with them, I assume, sorry, I'm getting over a cold if I sound funny. I assume they're going to abuse me at all times. I just think like, okay, I'm going into a meeting with that person. They're going to hurt my feelings. they're going to say something, or they're going to do something uncomfortable. Something's going to happen. And so when it happens, I will have predicted it. If it doesn't happen, then God bless. But it often did. Or some, because these people, their weirdness isn't relegated to just a few instances. People like this are generally weird in my experience. Like they have a general odd presentation that sort of pervades everything that they do. Have you found that to be true?
Sorry, my mind drifted. Say it again.
Do you have other examples other than those two people that you've worked with that were abusive to you?
Yeah, I've been abused by some clients.
What about like coworkers and stuff like that?
Abusive coworkers. Or
like, I don't know, acquaintances or something.
So the thought is, are these people, do they have kind of a weird relatedness? Sort of like...
Yeah, like in general, like it... Or,
probably.
Right. That's my experience.
Yeah.
It's like, now they might not be a detectable weirdness right off the bat, but once you get to know someone well enough, it's just like, you get to know like, oh, they're generally kind of uptight, or they're generally on guard, or they're generally hostile they have a general underlying rage that only pops out in overt ways every now and then,
Yeah.
And so my point is that that's what I would do, is I would just like, okay, I'm going into a meeting with that person. Do not trust them. Assume they're going to abuse you. And then when they do, you'll be ready for it. And you'll just be like, oh, there it is. There's that abusive statement. There's that energy. And, it hurts a lot less.
Yeah.
And what I found in the past was I didn't do that. And I would go in this cycle with, abusive people that I worked with, where they would abuse me. It would be horrible. I would be physically traumatized, and then be stressed out for a week or two. I would pull back and I'd be like, well, watch out for that person.
Yeah.
That person would be super nice to me.
Oh, yeah.
They would, lull me back into into trusting them again.
Right.
And this might be over a few months,
Yeah.
And then bam, something would happen, and I'd be like, how did I let them back into my trust zone? Like, why did I do that? And that's one technique. That doesn't solve the problem, but it mitigates it, I think.
It's unsolvable.
Yeah.
Though, what occurs to me as I'm listening to you is there's a transactional nature of being an employee, in this case, in a law firm, which is, I'm there for a reason. I'm there because this is how I make my living, or because, this is a stepping stone to, whatever it is I want to do or whatever, but I'm there because there's something that I want. And I think recognizing that I'm here as a volunteer and this is something that I want can help when you're putting up with somebody who's treating you like shit. Like, this is one of the costs of working in this place, right? But I think stepping back and recognizing the big picture, which is this is transactional and I'm here as a volunteer, I take back my power, right? And this is a shitty part of this job. I have to deal with this person who acts in these awful ways. Yuck, terrible. And that's one of the costs. And I can ask myself, well, is it worth it? And if the answer is, yeah, you know what, it is worth it, then suddenly I'm not such a victim, or feel, I'm not saying that your person is a victim. I am
accepting. Yeah.
And I'm more ego protected.
And choosing, like,
yeah,
I've evaluated and I'm choosing this.
Yeah.
For the pros and all the cons, I choose this situation. I don't like these cons.
Yeah.
But I'm in it and I accept it, and I'll evaluate it later.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in a situation like that now with my job. I won't go into specifics, but there's certain aspects of my job at Antioch where I'm currently in that space where I'm in the past, I would evaluate the pros and the cons, and I would say, oh, the pros outweigh the cons, so I'm going to stick with it. But there's a certain part of it right now where I'm like, are the cons getting too high? Because the cons have always been there, but so what I said to myself was, I've been dealing with this for about a year now. The cons have felt The cons haven't changed. They've just felt worse to me in the recent year.
Bummer.
And so I'm going to give myself another year, essentially. And if it doesn't if it doesn't go back to the way it felt before, I'm going to change. I'm going to reconfigure my job at Antioch,
All right.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Patron Annie writes, I'm a newly licensed LMFT and loving the field.
Congratulations.
Yeah. I've been hearing conflicting and often mixed up definitions of what qualifies as an anxiety attack. Panic attacks are defined in the DSM, but anxiety attacks seem to have different meanings for different people, including experts. Some folks define them based on triggers, length, physical versus cognitive symptoms, and more. And of course, some folks say the terms are interchangeable. What is your take, Bob?
My take, anxiety attack is just a way of talking about anxiety. So I don't know what an anxiety attack is. I'm with Annie here. Like, it is not, that's a idiosyncratic term. And so it depends. Do I need to understand the specifics? Because you probably want to define it phenomenologically, like what exactly did happen. And that might be important for a client if you're trying to help a client with anxiety. It's like, what do they mean by anxiety attack? But I don't think anybody should try to treat that like it's some kind of clinical term. It's just a way of talking about anxiety.
Yeah, that's great. The phenomenology of the individual, as they say, because people will say, oh, I had an anxiety attack. What they might be talking about is a panic attack,
right?
In terms of the language of the DSM. But they might be talking about something that is not a panic attack, and it could be. And so the term that I wish people would use would perhaps be anxiety episode or triggered anxiety or something.
Right.
Because anxiety attack, attack sounds more like a panic attack, right?
Yeah.
Like, have you had panic before?
No.
I have.
You have, I know.
Yeah. And it was awful. It's a very distinctive feeling. It's intense doom, like I'm going to die or lose my mind. And I'm positive of it. It's just like, and I'm describing my panic attacks before I cured myself, but this is back in the early mid-90s. Confusion, lightheadedness, a feeling like I want to run, but there's nowhere to run. Sweating, heart pounding. I mean, just intense heart pounding, and just dripping with sweat. And it could last a couple hours, and the after effects psychologically could last for months because of how horrible it felt, and how convinced or for lack of a better explanation, I was just left to my own devices and thought, oh, I'm going crazy.
Oh, man.
Like my brain is going to break and that'll be that. And then I went to grad school and took psychopathology with Ned Farley, and we got to the anxiety chapter, and I read the symptoms of panic disorder and was like, oh, that's what I have. And there were a number of different things I did after that, but pretty much right from there, 90% of my disorder was cured. Just knowing. Yeah.
That's terrific.
Just like, oh, other people have this. In fact, it's kind of common. This is exactly what because the key was I'm not going crazy.
Right.
Like I'm not dying. It's a odd psychological, physiological response that feels a certain way, but has absolutely no consequence. You can't die from it. I mean, there are very rare cases, I suppose, where if you have heart disease, if you've had a couple heart attacks already or something, that a panic attack could stress the system, so to speak. But
folks with that trouble are more apt to over what's the word? Like, guess the probability of the thing is higher than it really is. Nobody dies from a panic attack in the most rare of occasions, but folks with panic tend to what's the word I'm looking for? Do you know what I'm saying?
Generalize? Estimate. Oh.
Overestimate vastly the probability that the thing is actually going to cause harm.
Yeah. It's essentially like in terms of the stress it puts on your body, it's essentially like, sprinting around the track, like if you can sprint around the track and not die,
right,
then you're probably, then you're not going to die from a panic attack.
Right.
But it feels very intense and it's awful.
Yeah.
And so, and they would come out of nowhere,
Yeah.
so so DSM now differentiates between the two. There are expected or unexpected.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know
symptoms.
that.
Yeah. Most of the time, panic is associated with unexpected. Yeah, mine were. One time, it woke me up out of sleep.
Oh,
I wasn't even having a nightmare.
Yeah.
I was just like, all of a sudden, I wake up, and I was camping at the time too, which was not pleasant. But, yeah, they would just happen out of nowhere, and a lot of people will describe that. Sometimes there'll be a trigger. Like stress or nervousness about something, but it won't seem like, why then? It's like, I've had a lot of stressful moments. Why did it happen then? There's just something about the body. It's an extreme fight or flight response. What I think is happening in a metaphoric sense is that the system that helps us to fight or flight from danger gets sort of in a feedback loop, and it just kind of flies out of control. And then the brain actually interprets the physiological event as a danger. So, you are perceiving your amygdala, sympathetic nervous response system kind of kicks in, and just kind of randomly, sometimes your heart skips a beat. Sometimes you fart on, when you didn't like your body does weird things. Sometimes.
Body noise.
Yeah. Body just kind of, has a little weirdness. And so a little weirdness will happen in your body, and your heart will kind of start to pound a little bit. And then your conscious mind notices all that, and your unconscious mind notices all that, and says, oh, I must be dying. Something bad must. So then the physiological, so it's a feedback loop when between this anomaly, it gets noticed by the brain, which perceives it as a danger, which causes more fight or flight response, more adrenaline, which causes, more physiological response, which causes more concern from the individual, and it just flies out of control. And one of the things about shock or fight or flight is and this is the thing that really helped me was to understand was that, and maybe Ned Farley explained this to us, is that your brain, our fight or flight response, and maybe a lot of animals, is such that when a saber-toothed tiger is about to kill you, you don't need to think very clearly. You don't need to do high math. You don't need to plan for the future. You don't even necessarily need emotional control. What you need are oxygen to your muscles, and oxygen to your fear response, and oxygen to your coordination. So there are certain parts of the brain that are in charge of heartbeat, in charge of movement, and there are other parts of the brain that are in charge of higher thinking, and and those parts of the brain will be deprived of oxygen, and that's why sometimes people will have gastrointestinal problems when they're freaking out, because actually the blood doesn't need to be there either. And so we have an inability to think our way through a panic attack because our brain doesn't have the oxygen that it normally has. And once I figured that out, I was like, oh, so the key goal when I have that sort of hiccup of weird, anomalous, physiological panic is to get brain back to my prefrontal, get blood and oxygen back to my prefrontal cortex. And so I sit down, I close my eyes, and I just do relaxation. And the panic, if I can even call it that, will dissipate within like 3 minutes, Whereas in the past, that feedback loop would happen, and it would just take off.
Hell.
Right. So that's a panic attack.
Sure.
An anxiety attack, as you were saying, Bob, it's not a clinical term. There's no official diagnosis for an anxiety attack. It's something that people use colloquially, that for God knows what they mean. And it's fine to use that. But again, as you say, Bob, you want to, as a LMFT, you want to ask people what they mean by that. And as a therapist, I would refrain from using that term unless it's the parlance of the client, and that's the language you have. But I would, clinicians out there, I would not use the term anxiety attack because it's not well understood unless you follow it up with, by anxiety attack, I mean blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But honestly, I find that a lot of people don't really understand anxiety or panic. And so let's just try to reduce the confusion out there. Let's probably stick to the terms.
I don't like the word attack.
Really?
I don't think we should use that word attack because it implies malignancy and victimhood.
Huh.
How about episode? Episode is a great word.
Panic episode?
Panic episode, anxiety episode. It doesn't imply anything.
Is there a more intense word, though, than episode? Because episode sounds like, you know,
I hear you.
An episode of Friends, it's like... because it's awful,
Oh, yeah.
Panic. Could there be a panic hell zone or something? No, I don't know. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, let's answer some more questions. What do you say, Bob?
Sounds good.
All right, we're back from the break. As I always say after the break, if you haven't become a patron of the podcast, do so now. Also, you can join our Facebook page, the fan page, and you can also be a good person because that's also available to you. I'm sure you are.
All right. Colleen joined she's a patron.
Oh, she is?
Yeah.
Why?
So that she could listen to our episodes.
Oh.
Yeah, she said she was listening in the car on her way home last week, and she caught half of our episode, and then the second half was patrons only, and she couldn't hear it.
I didn't know she listened. That's sweet.
She just started.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
See, even Bob's wife is a patron of the podcast. So if you think you're better than Bob's wife, then I don't know what to tell you.
It's the only way she can get me to talk to her.
Next email about mental illness deniers. Anonymous patron writes in, I'm curious to know how you deal with mental illness deniers and how would you advise other people on how to deal with them? So she goes on to explain, and I'll paraphrase what she says in her email because I think it's important. So her sister has severe bipolar and, psychosis, hospitalizations. I think she's around 30 years old and she's her younger sister. She's been homeless. She was diagnosed in high school and it progressed through her 20s, The parents at first, the two sisters, their parents were on board with the typical treatment, meds, and because that's really all you can do for psychosis like that. She was stabilized on meds, which helped. And then the father read a few books by Robert Whitaker. Have you heard of Robert Whitaker? Apparently he's a famous author that denies psychiatry. Oh. There's a book or a series of books called Mad in America that he wrote. And Robert Whitaker claims that psychiatric disorders don't exist, like none of them, including bipolar. Similar to Scientology and Tom Cruise. And did you know that Tom Cruise believed that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's a staunch Scientologist,
right.
And Scientologists believe that not only is the DSM fraud, but they actually, it's almost like a conspiracy theory. They think that psychiatrists are purposefully drugging people, or at least unwittingly drugging people and making them sick and keeping them in the system and therefore making money and getting power and all this kind of stuff. It's really weird.
Yeah.
So the father, this patron's father, became completely convinced that the medications were actually causing the bipolar symptoms. She mentions that he's also a staunch evangelical Christian, and he's right-wing, and he thinks climate change is a hoax, and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, so the father is convinced that psychiatry is bullshit, and he actually convinced his daughter, the patron's sister, to go off of her meds. And lo and behold, the sister became symptomatic, and lots of psychosis and mania and stuff. And the parents have been, quote unquote, bailing her out, as she puts it. I think, paying for bills and this kind of stuff. And as a result, the parents are in debt now, and it's looking like the parents won't be able to retire as a result. And the family is really upset because they're worried, obviously, about the sister and her bipolar and psychosis. And they blame the father for, causing the instability, because the father is convinced that meds are bullshit and is convinced the sister. So she has a few questions that I want to review here.
Sure.
As a therapist, have you ever had encounters with mental illness deniers or subscribers to the anti-psychiatry movement? What do you think, Bob?
No, I haven't. Not personally, no.
Yeah, it's really rare. On the internet, I get questions like this all the time. People want me to talk about maybe this one, I don't know, but there's other, like Saz. I think his name's Thomas Saz or something. Yeah, you've never heard of him. So like, to us, we're like, huh? There are people like that,
Yeah.
It's sort of like if you work for NASA and you learn there's flat earthers, like that's a thing.
That's a thing.
Right. Because if you work for NASA, like that's so far afield from your cultural pocket, you know what I mean? And to us, like psychiatry denial is just, you've never even heard of it before. You didn't even know Tom Cruise did it.
I didn't.
Such a weird thing. Yeah. So for me, I've never experienced it, but I don't treat severe mental illness as neither do you. So maybe if we actually had a bipolar client, we might learn that they have an uncle that denies or something, maybe we would.
I used to treat folks who had these kinds of troubles, and I don't recall meeting anybody who had that particular bent. Right. Denying bent.
And maybe it's self-selecting too, because if they're in your office, then, maybe.
Yeah, good point.
I don't know. But I don't know. I think it's pretty rare. I would say the vast majority of people, if someone is psychotic, would assume that there's a good medication out there for someone like that. But I will say that most people, if not all clients that I have and have had, are overly afraid of medications. Not everyone, of course, but like I will talk with someone who will think that maybe, I have ADHD, or maybe my kid has ADHD. And, after talking about various different behavioral things we can do and different self-care things or workarounds, it's like, well, you could try ADHD meds. And they're just like, but no, that sounds so horrible. And I'm just like, it's just a stimulant. Like it's just a concentrated caffeine pill, essentially, that is, slow released over a period of time, depending on the medication. And you've drank caffeine before, right? So you're not that's a drug. Are you afraid of caffeine? And the side effects are pretty minimal. Now, if you take an ADHD med for 5 years, then there will be side effects often, like a lack of appetite, which leads to loss of weight and maybe even stunting your growth if you're 10 years old. But if you're 30 years old and you try these meds out, the worst things that'll happen to you is you won't be able to sleep at night because your dosage is too high, or the release is too later in the day. And you take it a couple days, say you don't like it, like you can't sleep at night, stop taking it, and it'll be gone out of your system effectively, like within a 24-hour period. So it's not like an antipsychotic med or an antidepressant that like alters permanently or for a significant amount of time, the way that your brain operates. Also, I talk a lot about, I try to help people reduce their anxiety about taking benzodiazepines, It's like Xanax, Valium, this kind of thing. So I'll just give myself. So as I've been talking about, I have anxiety and have had anxiety of various forms. It just sort of has morphed over time. It's like in the, carnival when you're hitting the whack-a-mole, right?
Whack-a-mole.
Right. So I had panic disorder for a while, so I cured myself of that. And then I had PTSD around a medical procedure I went through. And that took me a while to tamp down and self-treat, because I can go to a therapist for it, but I know what I need to do. It's, exposure and cognitive therapy. And so, and it's, it's been effective.
Yeah, good.
And but there's a constant buzz of low level,
like you're sort of made that way,
terror, and so, anyway, I had for many years been against medications.
Oh, really?
Benzodiazepines included, until I took courses on psychopharmacology and learned the differences between the different meds, and learned that benzodiazepines are essentially a 6-pack in a pill that doesn't have a hangover. But it has all the same effects. It slows down the brain. It makes your neurons less likely to fire, which has a side effect essentially of reducing anxiety. But it also, reduces heart rate, reduces your you can't think straight as well. You can still think, but so the way that the brain works, in terms of the inhibition thing, so when you get drunk, people sometimes lose their inhibitions. There's actually some research that refutes that says that people put lampshades on their head when they're drunk because culturally speaking, we've learned that when you're drunk, you're supposed to do stupid things. And there were studies at UW where they would give people fake beer. And I remember I would have friends that would do these studies because, you're in college and they're like, free beer research study. And, everyone would show up and they would give some of them placebo beer and watch their behavior. And they would notice that a lot of people would start acting more flamboyant or more social or, this kind of thing. But anyway, the idea is that, you slow your brain down and impulses occur to you and your brain doesn't have time to check it and say, don't do that or don't say that. Or, normally when your brain is working at normal speed, then your brain has the ability to catch things like that and say, nope, don't do that. Don't say that. That's not a good idea because of X, Y, and Z. So when you take a benzodiazepine, you get a little bit like that, not horribly, but a little bit. But so if you've ever been drunk before, mildly drunk, then you know what it's like to be on a benzo. And that's why you don't want to drink while you're on a benzo, because they can compound each other's. It'd be like if you took a benzo and drank a 6-pack, it'd be like drinking 12 beers, and you could pass out, hurt yourself, or even die from your heart stopping, essentially, in the same way you can die from heart stopping with alcohol. Anyway, my point is that I, late in my life, just like, I don't know, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, I had, they needed to put in a implant tooth in my face. Okay.
Really?
Yeah. I had a baby tooth that had been, in my mouth since I was, a baby, since I, got a molar, when you get molars, like 6 months, 12 months,
something like that.
I don't know. And I was, it was starting to, there was no root. Anyway, long story short, I needed to have this procedure done that was pretty involved. They needed to, cut my gum. They needed to drill into my jaw several times because they use a small drill, then a bigger drill, then a big, because if they use a big drill with the first drill, they could crack your, if you've ever worked on wood and drills and stuff. Anyway, so it was like an hour procedure, and they'd be drilling, and then they'd be installing this metal screw, essentially the female part of a screw thing, and I was like, "Are you kidding? Like, that is going to wreck me," because I was still kind of recovering from my medical PTSD. I was like, there's no amount of Novocaine that's going to save me from that one, like. Just prior to that procedure, they needed to pull out the baby tooth.
Right.
And so and that took, no joke, 3 seconds. So I lived across the street from the dentist, and I walked out my door, walked into the dentist. They were ready for me. I sat down in the chair. The dentist was there. He got his pliers. He pulled the tooth out. I was back in my house 9 minutes after I walked out the door. That's how fast the procedure was.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. 9 minutes from door to door. Okay?
Drive-through dentistry.
Yeah. So, and that's how easy. He just grabbed it with pliers and pulled out. Didn't hurt, bled a little bit because, there's still some kind of hanging on. I had an anxiety episode. It wasn't a panic attack, but it was an anxiety episode because my body, even though my mind's like, who cares? It's just a baby tooth. It's like getting a scab ripped off or something, like minor issue. Yeah.
Facts and logic did it though.
But the body doesn't like it. And so so heart racing, this was 3 seconds of procedure. And I'm thinking, how am I going to get through an hour of someone drilling into my jaw? This is not going to, I'm going to freak out. This is not going to be good. But so I tell my dentist, who, fellow Asian brother, and he's like, you know what? I have the exact same problem. He's like, I completely flip out when I go to the dentist. He's a dentist. Yeah. and he's like, I have a wonderful drug for you. Yeah. It's called Valium. And I'm like, really? Like from the 60s? Yeah, like right. Mommy's little helper? Isn't that what they used to call it?
No, that's a different one, but nonetheless, Valium.
What was Mommy's little helper?
It's a stimulant. I can't remember what it's called.
Oh,
the
stimulant.
Yellow pills. Yeah.
I thought it was Valium.
Was it Valium?
I don't know, but you would know better than I would. You're a little older than me. So he gives me this prescription and he says, okay, so take, there are 4 pills. Take one the night before, just to kind of, get you loose. Take 2, take 2 like 20 minutes before coming in or an hour before coming in or something. And then we'll keep 1 just in case like you're freaking out during the procedure. Well, I'm so like averse to taking meds that I didn't take the one the night before, but I definitely took the 2 before the procedure. It was like a massage. Yeah. I sat in that chair. I'm not talking like I was on a scale from 1 to 10. Like I wasn't like a 2. I was like a -3 on the anxiety scale. Right. I was like serene. I'm like, da-da. The drug makes you feel a little euphoric. So I felt better than I would have if I was just watching TV at home, like it. And afterwards, I was a little loopy, but not too bad. I was probably a little giddy walking in and out of the office. I took a 2-hour nap when I got home. And I woke up and everything was fine. And I was like, that is a wonderful drug. Benzodiazepines are wonderful. And so when I'm talking with people who suffer from anxiety episodes, panic or otherwise, and I explain to them, there's this drug that can really be great for moments where you are either having an episode that has a sudden onset or you're going to go into a situation that is going to be triggering to your anxiety. Now, you don't want to take benzos all the time. They can be addictive. They can also have an actual effect on the brain, as anything could. There are bad things that can happen if you take them for a long period of time. But what I found was that because my body went through the procedure in a state of serenity, the next time I went to the dentist, my body was like, oh, we've been here before. So the next time I went to the dentist, I didn't need the medication.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
So for example, let's say you're out there and you're like, I suffer from extreme social anxiety.
Oh yeah.
And when I have to give a speech or I have to go to a party or something, like I can't even do it. Well, let's say you take a effective dosage of Valium, Xanax, and you go through that instance with little anxiety. Well, the next time you go into it, you might not need the med because your body has been habituated to that thing. You're tricking your body into believing, or you're convincing, I guess, biologically speaking, that the situation is not to be feared. And anyway, so So back to the question, from the patron, there are, I haven't come across people who are like conspiracy theorists against psychiatry, but I myself and many other people around me, clients included, are most people I find to be overly afraid of particular meds. Have you found that to be true?
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of reluctance. Absolutely.
That you think is not justified?
It's not justified.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meds are generally safe.
Right.
Yeah.
She goes on to ask, what about your personal life? Which I think we've already talked about. Do you have anything personal you want to share about?
Yeah, I had a prejudice against antidepressants, and then I got depressed in, it's probably 9 years ago, something like that. And it was so awful. I hadn't been that depressed since my 20s. And saw a shrink, put me on Wellbutrin, and Wellbutrin made me dizzy every afternoon from 4 p.m. till around 9:30 or till I went to sleep or something. And I did not give a shit. I'll take dizzy any day over that hell of depression. And I'm thinking about tapering off of it in the spring.
Oh, you're still taking it?
Oh, yeah, I still take it. Feeling better was its own reward. So
you took Wellbutrin and it mitigated your depression.
Yeah, and my prejudice against my own personal prejudice against using meds. Oh, that's not for me, or weak people, blah, 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 which, is not something I would ever say to anybody I was working with or even think really, or even really believe. But inside me, a hard little knot of rebellion lived on. And right. I don't have that now.
Right. Yeah. I have the exact same sentiment about benzos.
Yeah.
It was a little bit rebellious. It's like, I don't need that, or I can do without it. But really, it's just fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
It's like, what happens when you put a pill in your brain,
right.
And it's like, they're safe, they're tested with monitoring. And if the side effects get too bad, then you just wean yourself off. You don't take it. But man, when they work, how wonderful that is. She goes on to say, should I try to change his mind using logic, reason, anecdotal evidence, and scientific facts? What do you think, Bob?
It probably won't work. I don't know. The thought that occurred is, would it be helpful to point out the causal relationship between her stopping the meds and her increase in symptoms? It might. Ultimately, though, someone's going to either pay attention to that or not, or they're not. And so if they're not, I don't think beating somebody down with facts and logic is going to do anything except promote their own resistance.
Yeah, I agree. It's a tough one.
It is.
I have thought about this a lot because there's so much misinformation, and there always has been.
Right.
And I think everyone has family members who believe in extremely non-scientific notions. And it's just really hard, especially when they're being pumped with misinformation, and there's a certain subsection of our society right now who are being pumped with false information, and they're being pumped with the notion that liberal scientists are lying to you. And so there's no way to counteract, if you come in with a quote unquote liberal notion, it's already been disproved just because you're a liberal and you're talking, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you're a psychiatrist and you're talking. It's like, well, if all psychiatrists or anyone who believes in psychiatry is either a conspiracy element or has, drank the Kool-Aid, then as soon as you open your mouth, it's like you're already done.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough one. For me, what I tell people to do, because I've talked with other people about this sort of thing, and I've done it in my own life, is often people think about it as like an intervention. It's like, okay, I'm going to sit my dad down, I'm going to tell him like the science, and I'm going to show him this documentary or something like that. And that might work, but it's probably not going to work. What I find is more effective, it's still not likely to work, but it's more likely to work than otherwise, is to go on a campaign. So she gave some details, like her and her dad are having a tough time in their relationship. So the first thing to do, if you really wanted to change his mind, if that was really what you wanted to do, which isn't your responsibility, by the way, but if you really wanted to do it, then you want to go on a campaign. So the first step is like establish a relationship where you don't talk about anything controversial. It's just like, every 3 weeks, call him on the phone, talk about anything other than, things that perturb the two of you. So then you kind of get a routine down, you get some love, you get some connection. Everyone benefits from that.
Right.
Then you start to subtly try to influence. Not trying to convince, but just drop a few things. Just be like, you know what? Sometimes I just wonder about, sister, that I just wonder if she would be better off if she tried, taking her meds again. I don't know. Just throwing it out there. And then he'll have a bunch of things to say. And then you just say, well, I don't know. I hear you. But at the same time, when she was taking the meds, it seemed like it was working. I don't know, just throwing it out there. So you're not pressuring, you're not insulting him, you're offering your opinion. You're not, ambushing him with a bunch of blah, blah, blah. The other thing, as Bob is saying, is, you don't want to expect too much. People, I've experienced these sorts of people personally and professionally. Sometimes they're referred to as having a thought disorder. Have you heard this term before, Bob?
Oh, thought disorder for sure. But are we talking about the dad or the sister?
The dad.
The dad.
Right. What is your working definition of thought disorder? It's not something us regular psychotherapists run into very often, but
I would only be guessing. Are we talking about psychosis, or are we talking about just somebody who's got a missing links in logic, or what? Right.
So thought disorder is a broad term in the clinical parlance that can refer to as severe things as psychosis, but also a number of other subclinical or other thought issues that can present in people that are often ignored. One of which is, as you say, an inability to think logically.
Yeah.
Or when someone thinks rather tangentially, or but they don't qualify for a psychotic disorder. We tend to think of like, okay, people have schizophrenia or they don't. But think of it like there's spectrums here. Your brain can be disordered in a lot of minor ways, and one of the ways that they found is that there are certain people who have trouble with logic. And I've run into people like this before. And it can be very frustrating because they're not mentally ill, but they actually have a consistent pattern of concluding odd things. Like I was talking, like flat earthers, for example. I would imagine that a good number of them would qualify for an observational assessment of a thought disorder. To conclude that the earth is flat, and to adhere and hold the very weird explanations for it's like, well, so why does the sun rise? They have a very weird model of that. Mm-hmm. You would really have to lack a certain logical ability. And it's not necessarily related to IQ. It can just be a quirk. And what I find is that there's a certain group of people that I'm thinking about personally and professionally who have trouble with logic, and they think in very emotional ways.
Right.
So it feels right to them, and so therefore it is right. And then no amount of logic can refute their feeling conclusion.
Yeah.
Have you run into people like that before?
Well, everybody has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of it?
An example of somebody who had resistance. Let's see. I keep getting this picture of my dad, but I'm not really sure why. Except he would reach emotional conclusions about things, and then I think, gather facts to pseudo support them, and arguing just stabilized his resistance. So it doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. I have found, again, flat earth people. I actually know a flat earth person, and I knew him before I knew he was a flat earther, and I liked him, and I thought he was a regular guy.
Yeah.
Normal, young Seattle kid guy, and he's probably like 30 or something.
Yeah.
And then he turns to me and he just starts, he's like, I was watching this documentary about the flat earth. At first I thought it was stupid, but they make some good points. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, oh my goodness. There are people that I know personally who believe in all the pseudoscientific claims that people make. I won't even go into them, but the other thing that I told her over email was that she's the whole family's in a real tough spot. You have a sister who is suffering from bipolar, psychotic episodes, homeless, can't hold a job, could die.
Yeah.
Could kill herself, could be harmed. It's a very scary place to be. And everyone in the family is stressed out about that naturally.
Right.
Probably the parents more than the kids.
That's parents.
And the dad is freaking out, doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, he doesn't.
And he has resorted to something quite weird. But it's a reaction to the stress. And one of the things that families will do is they will scapegoat an easier person to blame. And you can't blame the sister for having bipolar, but you can blame the dad for being rigid in his thinking.
Sure.
For being, an evangelical Christian when you don't like that, or being anti-climate change for being right wing or something. You can do that. It feels more congruent. It feels easier. It's safer. But really what's happening is this family is going through something incredibly tough.
Yeah, really hard.
And if I was a family therapist working with this family, I would get them off of the whole topic of meds or no meds. I would just say, let's just talk about the stress. Let's just talk about how this is terrible and how she's never not going to have bipolar. She's going to be suffering from this disorder probably for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And we're just going to be trying to help her with the symptoms. I know people with bipolar, and once they become diagnosed and they become, severely symptomatic, they're really never the same again. You know what I mean? Have you ever known anyone like that? It's like,
yeah, I have.
If they're on medication, then they're different from that because the medication can affect them. But even if they're not on the medication, they're just different. Like there's something, their personality has changed. They're not the same person anymore. In some ways, it's almost like you have to grieve the person and accept this sort of new version of the person. Yeah. This isn't always the case, of course. In moderate forms of bipolar, I would say this isn't true. But for severe, is that what you feel?
Yeah. That is, what you're describing, I think, is real, and grieving makes all the sense in the universe.
Yeah, and it's tough, it's sad, and so that's what I was telling you over email. It's just like, I think that's the main thing your family is suffering from, and I think you and your other siblings are probably focusing on this issue with the dad, because the other thing is like, how influenced was the daughter by the dad? Do you know what I mean? The daughter could have said, well, my dad has this wacky idea about medication, but I'm going to still take my meds. You know what I mean? And a lot of people with bipolar go off their meds because they just don't feel like taking it. Do you know why they do that?
Well, one thing happens is I feel like crap. I take the meds. I feel better. Oh, I'm better. I don't need the meds no more. Then I go off the meds. Then I fall back into. And lots of times it takes people, months or years to kind of come to a place of acceptance about the thing. And they go through relapse and relapse and relapse again and again.
Right. And the medications aren't great. They have side effects. So there's reasons why you wouldn't want to take them.
Yeah.
Plus, when you become hypomanic, you believe that you can do anything. You have a sudden burst of energy, self-esteem, plans to do great things, and the medication can be seen as getting in your way.
Yeah.
So anyway, she asks here, what would you do if a mental illness scenario was directly impacting a mentally ill person's ability to take care of themselves? In my mind, this is no different than anti-vaxxers or Christian scientists who refuse to take their children to the doctor when they're sick.
Oh, well.
I feel like at some point there should be a legal intervention. What do you think?
No. The thing is it's not the dad, it's the sister. And we agree that people over the age of 18 are allowed to make decisions for themselves, whatever those decisions happen to be. We are believers in civil rights, and so she has the right to choose what she wants to do. Now, in the instance where there's an acute threat to life, then I think each state has its own version of the rules of when you can commit somebody and compel them into treatment or whatever.
But even then, it's only temporary.
It's temporary, but
like a week at the most.
Yeah. So there isn't. We are believers in civil rights as a society or a culture or whatever you want to call it, and so there isn't really a mechanism for the thing that this person is wishing for, and I would wish for it too if I were her, because it's your sister.
Right. Yeah, I agree. There's no legal recourse other than if you believe she's going to kill herself or kill someone else, because she's not a child and she's not a vulnerable adult.
Right.
So if she was a child, then you would have a case. If she were 13, you could report the father to CPS for sure.
Right.
And CPS, they take situations like that pretty seriously.
Right.
Medical neglect, they call it. Having said all that, there are some things about what the dad believes in that are actually true. People who depend on the DSM, prescribers, people who have just completely accepted the DSM as like gospel and hard science, will say things and do things that are philosophically problematic and medically problematic. There are labels in the DSM that we could say are quote unquote hard science. Psychosis isn't something that we make up. It's not something that people fake. I mean, you can fake it, but those who are legitimately psychotic, it's not something that is, weakness or a regular variance of human behavior. It's or stress related. You know what I mean? It's in all likelihood a biological phenomenon that we can't see because we don't have the ability to measure such things in the brain. But I'm positive, and once we do have the ability to measure the brain in such a way to identify such things, we'll say, oh, this person has a psychotic pathway or a psychotic system, or they have a system that lends itself to psychosis or something. Bipolar, true bipolar is a legit hard science reality. PTSD, panic disorder, dissociation, these kinds of things are real. There's no debate. It's like you can't say like it's a social construction. You can't say PTSD is a social construction. It's a real phenomenon that exists in human beings. It's pretty convincing. Yeah. But there are softer things, personality disorders, for example, oppositional defiant disorder, adjustment disorders, paraphilias, gender dysphoria, these kinds of things. Right. Pretty sure in 50 years, the DSM will have different language or just eliminate certain things. Whereas 50 years from now in the DSM, psychosis is still going to be there. It might be called something different, but it'll be the same thing. Now, but I know people who are sort of completely in the DSM world. You and I, we don't depend on the DSM. Like someone can come to you and me and say, the DSM is bullshit, and that doesn't threaten our life at all. Like it's like, okay, DSM's bullshit. That's fine. There are certainly parts of the DSM that are bullshit. I agree, because you and I our money, our livelihood doesn't depend on people believing in the DSM. Many people come to us. We don't even have to diagnose them. And they probably don't qualify for a diagnosis, and they're talking about relationship problems and grief issues and self-esteem issues and divorce questions and recovering from divorce, parenting advice, next stage of life. This isn't DSM stuff, so we don't care. But there are some people who, do assessments and court things or medication prescribers. They depend on people saying DSM is hard science, and because if you state that the DSM is socially constructed, then they're like, well, every decision I'm making clinically is based on the notion that DSM is scientifically rigorous. You know what I mean? Also, some prescribers. So your dad has read stuff probably that talks about prescribers are too in love with their medications. Have you run into that before?
Oh yeah.
Like, what do they do?
They overprescribe.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when I worked at the psych hospital 100 years ago, many of the kids 4 to 13, were given Mellaril, which is a liquid form of an antipsychotic. And yet the incidence of psychosis in children is actually really low. And Mellaril, it's, shit, man, what are we doing?
Did it just mellow them out?
Yeah, I think it was sedating.
So you have a kid who has been abandoned by their parents or periodically attachment injured.
Yeah.
And have parents maybe that are addicts or have parents who are depressed or, some kind of stress. And the kid has, lo and behold, some behavioral issues.
Yeah.
And if you're a psychiatrist who is of this certain ilk, and you only have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And so it's like, well, I have a medication that will help with that.
Right.
And the parents are like, or the foster parents or adoptive parents or somebody is like, thank God, give me a pill.
Right.
You give the pill to the kid's mellow. There's some side effects like, they sleep a lot or they're a little out of it or they don't do as well in school or something, but they're not jumping off the walls. They're not punching me in the face. They're not throwing things at me. They're not running out the door.
Right.
So great.
It's working.
Right. Instead of trying to help the kid build stronger attachments, help the kid grieve whatever they've been through,
right.
Help the kid understand that they have power in the world, asking the kid what they want. And that kind of works really hard. It takes a long time.
Yeah.
And perhaps is more expensive.
Uh-huh.
And isn't guaranteed to work.
You're not going to get immediate bang for your buck.
Right. So there are certainly situations like that. Another thing that I often point out to people, and I get even other trainees of mine, because they're not medical professionals, they don't necessarily know this. Like, do you know you're on Wellbutrin, is that an antidepressant officially? Do you know the effectiveness percentage compared to placebo when it comes to antidepressants? Do you have any idea?
It's actually comparable, right? Like placebo is shown to be about as effective as the drugs. Right.
Most people don't know that. Mm-hmm. Most people think it's like, oh, antidepressants, well, they work. People think of it like, I don't know, aspirin or something. It's like, well, if you're in pain, you take aspirin, and it works.
Got diabetes, the insulin. Yep.
Insulin, right?
Rock and roll.
Right. It works for everybody. Yeah. And antidepressants, so they take, again, 1,000 depressed people. They give 500 people placebo and 500 people Wellbutrin or Prozac or one of the other ones. And especially as time has gone on, they have found that the placebo effect, helps about 25% of people or something like that. It's in that range. Mm-hmm. People on the antidepressant, the effect will be something like 30%.
Yeah.
Or 35% or something. So in essence, the drug only helps really something like 5 to 10% of people. Apparently you're one of those people, or
Well,
at
maybe.
least apparently.
I'm okay with being a placebo guy.
Right. Exactly. As long as, the side effects aren't too, what are the side effects of Webergen?
Dry mouth. It's probably the only one I have.
That's it. Yeah. That's, quite shocking to a lot of people. You're like, wait, so
Right.
Antidepressants are only,
Right. I mean, how many antidepressant commercials have you seen on TV this week? Well, you don't watch TV, but there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, I watch TV when I watch football, so I see some, but so yeah, the notion that antidepressants work, we don't understand how the brain works.
No.
Depression is one of those, particularly hard things to figure out. It's, anxiety actually, like benzodiazepines, for example, they work.
Yeah.
Ongoing SSRIs for anxiety, again, less likelihood of working. So my point is that you have prescribers that are, oh, you're depressed, take this, let's try this med. And there's this assumption that like something's going to work. But like, if you look at the percentages, it's not a high likelihood that anything's going to work.
Yeah.
And some prescribers are responsible and will know this and actually explain this to people. I think maybe younger prescribers, I don't know. But some prescribers, they have completely ignored this notion. And they're just like, well, anecdotally, I find it works all the time. You know what I mean? And so they're not even following their own science. Also, I have found some prescribers don't emphasize the side effects enough. Like I had a client come to me, and a couple, and the wife was on an antidepressant, and I didn't know that because I just didn't ask, but the couple were having problems with sex, and she had no libido.
Right.
And over time, it's like, sorry, are you on any medication? Or she's like, oh yeah, I'm taking an antidepressant. I'm like, so when did you start taking that? She's like, well, a number of years ago. Did you have more libido before that? She's like, yeah, I guess I did. Well, it's possible your antidepressant has completely eliminated your desire to have sex. Like that can happen. And she was like, really? And I'm like, how does your medical professional not mention that to you? Like, by the way, there's a trade-off. We can give you this pill. It can help with your depression, but it could also completely eliminate your desire to have sex. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't take antidepressants just so you have a libido back, but I'm saying like people sometimes are not explained the possibilities. You know what I mean? Right. And so that's another critique of the psychiatry profession for sure. Meds are both overprescribed and underprescribed. There are some there's lots of people that are taking too many meds, as you were talking about, but there's a lot of other people who aren't given any meds. Yeah. There's ADHD medication is a good example of this. There's a Venn diagram. You have people who actually have ADHD and benefit from the ADHD medication in the middle. But then you have on the left side, you have people who have ADHD but aren't taking meds. And on the right side, you have people who without ADHD or people who are taking meds without ADHD. And it's this, weird sort of landscape. So ADHD meds are both overprescribed and underprescribed. I once had a client who came to me with a lot of different ailments and a lot of different issues psychologically. And at some point I was like, how many meds are you on? And she kind of gave me a list, and I said, could you like get me your medical records so I can look them over, because this is after I had taken some classes in psychopharmacology and biology and stuff. So I was like, I was thinking, well, I could probably sift through some of this stuff. I discovered she was on dozens of meds, many of which have massive side effects psychologically, many of which are pulling her in different directions in terms of sleep and mental ability and energy wise. And I was like, who's monitoring all this? And she's like, well, I have like 10 doctors. And I'm like, I think I now have to become that person, because no one else is. And so I had to actually coordinate all this medical care and say like, do you know that she's on this other med? They're like, oh yeah, maybe that's a problem. Like, yeah, that's a problem. Like that we gotta, because she didn't know. She was just following directions. She would go to her physician, give a complaint. And a lot of times it's hard to know, but I remember hypothesizing that like at least half of her complaints were side effects to the drugs. And she was given more drugs so, these cases happen. And people who have Scientologists, for Tom Cruise, this patron's father, they have a legitimate gripe against this. It's legit. Yeah. And, there are absolutely cases where but this doesn't mean we have to throw out the entire field of psychiatry, Another example here that I'll just conclude with is I had a client, she was 16 years old, and she went to a psychiatrist, and sometimes they have very short interviews, just like 5 minutes. And it's like, oh, okay, you have depression. You qualify for the diagnosis of major depressive episode, gave her an antidepressant, and that was it. She's just like, okay, I'll take this antidepressant. And then I interview her and I find out that she's, grieving a number of different losses. She has a lot of stress from life and school and her family life. Her self-esteem has never been good. She's been traumatized, et cetera. And I'm like, well, of course her mood isn't going to be very great. Is this a biological problem, or is this a normal reaction to the cards that she drew in life, And so that's another problem do you ever see that problem in your practice?
I think that happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a lot of borderline people in your DBT groups, and they might also have major depression, of course.
Yeah.
But when you suffer from relational trauma, you're going to have some ups and downs in your mood, and will be mistaken either for depression or bipolar, right? Do you get a lot of that?
All the time. I every time anybody says bipolar disorder to me, I'm like, big grain of salt here, guys, because maybe you do, maybe you don't. It certainly gets overdiagnosed.
Right. Yeah. Someone who is extremely upset suddenly, and because they're going through a divorce, or they got fired from their job, or their father died, or just something happened, and they have an extreme emotional reaction, and they're like, oh, this person has bipolar. I'm always just like, because bipolar is a very specific condition, that is really quite different from someone with borderline having an emotional reaction. Yeah. You know what I mean?
It is. That is. You have to see it. Maybe you have to see it to recognize that it is. But once you see it, it's not. It's not easy to mistake.
Right. It's very different. Mania, psychosis, schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Is it's really quite particular.
Yeah.
Someone who is extremely agitated from a personality disorder sort of issue is just an exaggerated form of like what everyone goes through. Mania is not an exaggerated form of what people go through. Mania is it's a severe mental illness. That's why we call it that. It's like you're mentally ill at that point. You're not making sense. You see things, you hear things, you have very, very strange ideas about things that last for a long time.
Yeah, it lasts a long time.
You're not just like really, really upset about being fired from your job.
No.
It's quite boggling to the mind. And I find I've known psychiatrists who don't know that difference.
Oh, man.
Because I think they only see people for 5 minutes, 15 minutes at a time. They don't really understand personality disorders, but they definitely understand bipolar.
Right.
Because bipolar, you can identify in 5 minutes. You get someone that's manic for 5 minutes, and, maybe 10 minutes of observation, you can be like, oh, okay, or you ask someone about a past manic episode, they're like, oh, well, I believed I was Jesus and I was running all over town. And I thought the cops were, the devil, and these kinds of things. Right. And you're like, oh, okay, some kind of psychosis there. Whereas borderline narcissistic, histrionic, dependent, these kinds of paranoid personality, for example, these are things that take a long time to figure out. And it's really upsetting. I had a client that had a personality disorder that was, while I was treating them, had a emotional episode because they were relationally challenged, and went to the hospital in crisis and was diagnosed with bipolar and given meds.
Right.
And I was like, no. Well, at what point were you going to call me and ask me what I think? You know, like the person who's been diagnosing, assessing, and treating this person for a long time. But this hospital said, bipolar, meds. And when he came to me, I was like, you don't have bipolar. I mean, and I said, unless you've left something out. So I was like, don't take those meds. Go back to them and tell them that your primary clinician does not assess you as having bipolar.
Oh, let's be clear, folks, that it's outside the scope of our licensure, if you're a psychologist or a counselor, to give people advice about whether or not to take meds. So you want to be careful. It
is. And, thanks for pointing that. On the other side, there are certain psychologically trained individuals like myself who have enough expertise in education, supervision, and practice to say some things.
Yeah.
Telling someone to go against another physician's orders is not one of those things, but telling someone that they probably don't need to take medication for bipolar is one of those things.
And that's the difference between making a good clinical assessment and protecting yourself from liability.
Right. I actually had a supervisee. Actually, we got into a big conflict about this because she thought I can't remember what she was upset about, but she had a client who had been taking meds for a long time and had decided to go off of their meds and told my supervisee, I'm going off my meds. I don't like it anymore. And my supervisee was like, oh, it's a good choice, or I support that choice. But the client had a history of suicidal behavior and thoughts. And so that's all I needed to hear was change the medication, not communicating with your prescriber, suicidal risk, therapist, my supervisee knows about that and is not doing anything. Not even amping up the suicide, prevention work. And I, said to the supervisee, I said, it's not likely a problem, but if something happens, you have just completely opened a wide open door to liability because that the client is going off of a recommendation from another clinician, and you don't know anything about that issue officially, and you're not amping up your suicide prevention stuff. So it's like, and so my supervisee was just like, well, what are you saying? Like, but I don't think the client needs to be taking the medication. And I'm like, okay, great. But, you don't really know that. One, two, the society doesn't see it that way. Like, that's fine. You can have that opinion, but the legal system and society doesn't see you as a valid evaluator of such a thing. So, you might be right, but if something happens, like just standing up strongly and saying that you believe something in court isn't going to hold any water,
Mm-hmm. I imagine you wanted that person to protect themselves from, risk.
Yeah. And me, because I'm supervising.
Oh, well, shit. Yeah.
So anyway, in conclusion to all this stuff, it's tough, a tough situation, heartbreaking to have a family member go through it. I've personally been through that myself. Have you ever had someone close to you go through, develop bipolar, before your eyes?
No.
I have it, or schizophrenia or anything like that?
No.
Yeah. It's, I mean, you can imagine, you've been with clients. It's the worst.
Yeah.
To have, like I said, someone's personality essentially change to some degree, not always, but that's tough. To lose them as a person that you can depend on, that's tough. To worry about them, that something horrible is going to happen. To know that something bad is going to happen. I mean, so, the person writing in, she's like, my sister's not on her meds. Bipolar is a cyclical thing, and she's known to do, pretty erratic things. something bad's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And then she's just going to recover from that. The parents are going to bail her out. She's not going to take her meds. And then it's just going to happen all over again. And this is someone you love. This is your sister.
Yeah.
And you just know that if we had a different system, that you could actually do something about it. You know, if our system didn't value adult freedoms the way that we do it for this population, there would be a more robust involuntary response to these kinds of situations. And it's heartbreaking. It's terrifying. It's awful. And what do you do? Like, just stand by and watch the train wreck? Like, you do nothing? That doesn't seem right.
Yeah. But
you're powerless. What the hell are you supposed to do? And the person you're trying to help, if someone has cancer, everyone's on the same team. Everyone's trying to get rid of the cancer, including the patient, you know. Someone has bipolar and they're anti-meds. The very person you're trying to save actually does not want you to help them.
Yeah, not refusing the treatment.
Yeah, and so you're forcing someone to better their lives. It's a very, very tough situation to be in. Again, an easy answer is just like, well, just distance yourself, move on.
Oh.
But,
it's sister.
Yeah. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
There's no, as you said right at the beginning, there's no easy answer. It's like, you're just kind of screwed. Powerless, train wreck, things are working against you in your own family. You're sad, you're scared, you're upset, angry, worried. There's just no easy answer to that. Let's not end on a depressing note, Bob.
All right.
What are you happy about this week?
I got certified
in EFT.
Yeah, in emotionally focused therapy for
we
couples.
should talk about that at some point.
Yeah, that's thrilling.
Yeah.
It only took 7 years.
7 years.
Oh, God, yeah.
So EFT is emotionally focused therapy. It's a form of therapy that's commonly used in couples therapy, very powerful. And why did you want to become certified?
Well, I didn't originally. I just wanted to learn it and be competent. But then I want to do more of that kind of work. So about 18 months ago, I started thinking about what do you got to do to get this stuff to happen. And it's quite a lot. So I did it. It took a year and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the 7 years was like supervised
and practice and my own couple counseling and yeah.
Oh, you have to go through your own?
No. I just did.
Oh,
yeah.
I was like, wow, it's very psychoanalytic.
That's rigorous, right? Yeah.
So now you can, on your website and your cards, you can call yourself a certified EFT practitioner.
I can. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Only 7 in the city.
Only what?
7.
Only 7 certified EFT people in the city?
Yeah.
Wow.
Counting me.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. So anyways, that's one of the things I'm pleased about. It's exciting news.
Yeah.
Got a very nice letter from the person that certified me, also my teacher, which was as awesome as actually being certified.
Oh.
Yeah, it was really nice. I had to submit tape of session and she was just really, lovely lady anyways. But
do you want to give her a shout out?
Yeah, Gail. Thank you. Gail Palmer up there in Canada.
Oh, in Canada.
Yeah.
Gail Palmer.
Yeah.
Isn't Sue Johnson Canadian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of EFT people, the bigwigs are Canadian.
Was Leslie Greenberg?
Yeah, actually Sue Johnson was his student.
Right.
Yeah.
He's Canadian too?
Canadian.
Oh.
Anyways, that's me. How about you?
I'm getting over a cold, which is
Nice.
great. It was the coffee phlegmy situation.
Ooh.
So there's a few days there where I was coughing like, I still am a little bit, but fits where you feel like you're going to pass out.
Yeah.
Cause you can't breathe.
Right.
So
Good to be through that.
That it feels good to be on the tail end of that.
Yeah.
What else do I feel good about?
Talking into a new mic?
Talking into a new microphone. I have basically been on a shoestring budget for the podcast for the entire 10 years of the podcast. But this, Christmas season, I was like, I'll splurge and actually buy a microphone. I'll do research. And so I did tons of research on like the best sounding mics, and this one won. It is not an impressive microphone. It's very small, but it's also great because it's, you know, it's small, so it's not imposing. So I don't have to shove my face in the microphone like you have to with my older, shittier microphone. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining me out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.